Hello, and welcome to Boring History for Sleep. I'm glad you're here. It is time to let the day dissolve, to feel the muscles in your neck and shoulder soften, to let go of the lists, the worries, and the sharp edges of the waking world. There is nothing you need to do, nothing you need to solve. The only task before you is to rest, to settle into your bed, and to feel the comfort of your pillows and blankets. Allow your breathing to slow. A long, slow breath in, and a gentle, easy breath out. Tonight, we are not going to a battlefield. We are not visiting the glittering court of a king. We are traveling instead into the shadows of the past, into the deep, cold heart of a medieval castle. But we are going there safely, protected by time, as quiet observers. Let your mind drift as we step back through the centuries, to a fortress of gray stone standing stark against a winter sky. The air is sharp with frost, and the wind carries no sound but its own high, lonely whistle. We are going to go inside, down, past the great hall, past the kitchens, past the barracks, down and down into the gloom, where the walls seem to breathe coldness. We are going to explore what it meant to endure a night, a long, freezing night, as a prisoner in a medieval world. But you are safe. You are warm. And as our story unfolds, you can let it simply wash over you, a gentle murmur in the dark, guiding you towards sleep. Imagine walking into that echoing chamber for the very first time. The air itself feels sharp, as if it has teeth. The torches in the corridor sputter, their smoke crawling up the damp stonework. And then, the sound that seals your fate. The heavy, final thud of an iron door slamming shut behind you. The sound echoes, and then it is gone, leaving a silence that is heavier than the door itself. You are in a cell, but it is less a room and more a pit carved from the castle's foundation. You take a breath, and the smell of mildew and wet limestone clings to your nostrils like a punishment. This is no place meant for human comfort. You look around. There is no furniture, no welcome mat. There is only the floor. You lower yourself, perhaps hesitating, and the moment your body touches the ground, the chill races up through you. It moves from your legs into your spine, a shocking, invasive cold, as if the stone itself wants to freeze your marrow. There is no straw yet, no blanket, no mercy. There is only the ground, the bare, unforgiving flagstones that centuries of prisoners before you have also cursed. You lie awake, your breath clouding in the air, and you begin to understand the architecture of your new reality. The truth is, medieval prisons were not designed to rehabilitate or even to house people comfortably. They were meant as holding pens, grim reminders of a lord's power. Historians note that the earliest castle keeps often doubled as prisons almost by accident. Spaces that were unused for storage or archives simply became cells, and the unlucky people thrown inside were simply expected to endure. The Tower of London, perhaps the most infamous castle of all, functioned exactly this way. It was a collection of cold chambers, damp walls, and not a single thought given to comfort. The very idea of a prison as a correctional institution was centuries away. And so you lie on the stone, and the cold does more than make you shiver. It presses, it squeezes, it convinces you that you are shrinking. Your heart slows, your limbs ache, and your mind already begins to conjure images of hearths you will never see again. You are in a space closer to a pit than a bedroom. You shift, trying to find a new position, but the stone is the same everywhere, relentless.
You hear the sounds of the dungeon. The soundscape becomes your first lullaby. Drips of water echo in the corridor like hollow bells. Far above, a guard shifts his weight, his boots thumping faintly on a wooden floor. And somewhere unseen, a rat scurries, its claws clicking against the stone.
Every sound reminds you, you are locked in, forgotten in a darkness that feels infinite. Scholars continue to dispute how deliberately harsh these cells were. Some argue the cold was just a side effect of architecture, fixed stone that trapped the winter damp, narrow arrow slits that funneled icy drafts. Others insist the chill was purposeful, a silent and easy form of cruelty meant to weaken both body and spirit. Either way, your skin prickles as you lie on the bare rock. You pull your own cloak tighter, if you were lucky enough to still have it. Many were not. Many sat in just a thin woolen shirt, their teeth knocking together like castanets while the hours dragged on. And so the first night passes, measured not by hours, but by shivers. You begin to wonder, in the endless dark, which is harder, the stone floor or the cold itself, and which one will claim you first. You wake, if you ever truly slept at all, with your cheek pressed into something new. It is scratchy, sharp, and crackles under your weight. Straw. At best, a guard, in a gesture that is less about compassion than practicality, has tossed in a handful of straw. This, you learn, is your new bed. But the moment you shift, something skitters away. You scratch instinctively at your arm, and a welt rises immediately under your fingers. You realize you are not alone in this straw. Fleas, lice, and perhaps a spider or two have taken up residence. Medieval bedding in a place like this was nothing like the rustic, romantic image of hay bales in a clean barn. Here, in this cell, it is more like lying in a sack of kindling that has been dragged through a pigsty. This was a mainstream fact. Most prisoners across Europe were not given real bedding. The straw was a practical matter. It absorbed the filth, the sweat, and the waste. And it was far easier to burn and replace than to scrub down stone floors slick with human misery. Accounts from French and English castles describe this reality vividly. Prisoners would crouch on these same straw mats for weeks, sometimes months, until the bedding simply rotted beneath them, decomposing into a sour-smelling sludge. You shift again, and the itch spreads up your arm, a living tide of tiny jaws. The air fills with the sweet, sour stink of this decomposition, mixed with damp and sweat. Each exhale sends a puff of dust into your face, grains that stick to your lips. The prickling sensation doesn't stop, no matter how much you slap at your skin. Soon you imagine they are crawling inside your clothes, burrowing into your hair, your ears. You wonder if sleep is even possible on this stage for torment. And yet, here is a quirky, grim tidbit from the era. Fleas were so abundant that some prisoners joked about them as roommates, even giving them names. One 14th century satire describes a Sir Itch and a Dame Bite who kept more consistent company than the jailer. You might laugh bitterly to yourself. If you are naming the bugs, you know your mind has begun to unravel. Historians still debate the intention behind the straw. Was it a form of charity? A meager attempt to keep men from dying of cold too quickly? Or was it sheer negligence, scraps thrown in only to manage the buildup of waste? The truth, most likely, is that it was simply practical for the guards. It saved them labor. You lie still, trying to breathe through your nose, but the sound of scratching fills the silence. It's not just the insects, rats, drawn by the filth and the promise of some small warmth, begin burrowing into the bedding. Their scratching is punctuated only by your own heartbeat, thudding in your ears. You turn on your side, staring into the shadows. Another prisoner snores softly, oblivious, or perhaps just resigned. You envy his surrender. The straw shifts again beneath you, like a restless beast. And in that shifting, you feel the true cruelty of this bedding. It promises relief from the cold stone, but it offers only a different flavor of discomfort. It is perhaps softer on your bones, but it is infinitely sharper on your mind. You scratch again, wondering if dawn will ever come, or if the fleas will simply drain you first. Your back aches from a night spent twisting on straw that felt more like thorns. When the guard returns, he doesn't bother with words. He shoves aside your heap of vermin-ridden hay with his boot and gestures toward the corner, where a single plank leans against the wall. Tonight, it seems, you graduate to wood. You drag the plank into the middle of the cell, brushing off patches of green mold that bloom on its surface. The smell of damp oak mixes with the ammonia tang of the chamber pot. As you lower yourself onto it, the surface is cruelly uneven. Splinters catch in your thin tunic. Your spine registers every groove, every knot. You try to shift, but something stops you. An iron ring set in the floor is now connected to your ankle. Chains clink, cold as winter water. Suddenly, the board feels less like a bed and more like a punishment bench. This was a historical fact. Many medieval prisons offered no straw at all. They offered only wooden planks or bare boards fixed to the wall. Sometimes these were angled so that if you tried to rest too comfortably, you would simply slide off. Records from London's Newgate prison describe this vividly. Captives were chained flat, their wrists and ankles stretched to anchor points while they lay on these planks, their bodies stiffening with the ache of immobility. And here is the quirky tidbit: some jailers supposedly charged rent for the privilege of this plank. If you couldn't pay, it was back to the stone floor for you. There is a 15th century account of a thief who scraped together a few pennies from sympathetic visitors, only to have the guard pocket the bribe and laugh, taking the bed away anyway. Even in misery, there was a tax. Scholars disagree on whether these wooden planks were considered a step up in comfort or a step down in cruelty. Some argue they were more hygienic, certainly easier to clean than rotting straw. But others counter that they were deliberate torture, designed to keep prisoners in a state of half-wakefulness, never able to collapse into real restorative rest. You shift your weight again, and the answer seems obvious. The chains bite into your skin, the iron warming only slightly against your ankle. You try to curl your body, to draw your knees in, but the length of chain is stingy, tugging you back each time. Every move becomes a negotiation. Endure the splinter pressing into your shoulder, or shift and feel the iron ring dig deeper into your bone. Your ears fill with the silence, broken only by the metallic rhythm of the chains scraping with each breath you take. You imagine those echoes traveling down the corridors, reaching others shackled in their own cells. Somewhere, another captive coughs, the sound hollow, like a church bell struck in a cavern. You try to close your eyes, but your body refuses the lie of rest. The plank is a parody of a bed. It is a mockery that promises relief and delivers only pain. You know that in this place, sleep itself is a luxury, rationed out like bread or air. You are pinned not just to this board, but to the cold logic of imprisonment itself. Here, even your dreams must kneel before the iron. The chill feels even heavier tonight. It presses down like an extra blanket, only this blanket is made of ice. You curl into yourself on the wooden plank, but it offers no kindness. You try rolling toward the wall, hoping the stone will at least block the draft from the arrow slit high above. Instead, the wall feels like a frozen tombstone, leaching away what little warmth your body has stored. Then you hear it. A faint rustle from the other side of the cell, a low, cracked cough, a body shifting in straw. You aren't alone. And for the first time, that fact doesn't scare you. It stirs a small, desperate ember of hope. When the night grows cruelest, humans do what livestock have always done. They huddle. You inch closer to the other prisoner. He is gaunt, his face shadowed. He doesn't speak, but when you lie shoulder to shoulder with him, neither does he move away. The heat of another living body radiates, ever so faintly through ragged wool. It is a reminder that you are not entirely abandoned to the cold. This is a mainstream historical fact. Accounts from prison registers across Europe note that captives shared sleeping space, not for friendship, but for survival. In Paris, clerks listed entire families jailed together, all of them pressed into a single cell. In England, jails were so overcrowded that men slept literally on top of one another, creating a grim pyramid of bodies to fend off the chill. Whether you liked your fellow inmate or not mattered little. His warmth was a resource as valuable as food. And here comes the quirky tidbit that had been turned into makeshift prisons. Guards mockingly referred to the prisoners as the pigs. This was not only because they lived in filth, but because they huddled in heaps like penned swine on a winter night. Some even claimed that the smell of sweat and breath steaming in those dark chambers was indistinguishable from a barnyard. You almost laugh at the comparison until you catch the sour tang of your neighbor's breath mixing with your own, and you realize how accurate the insult might be. Still, historians argue about whether this communal sleeping was tolerated or even encouraged by the wardens. Some evidence suggests jailers deliberately crammed captives together, reasoning that the group's collective heat would keep them alive longer. This preserved their ransom value, or at least kept them alive for their court appearance. Others think it was nothing more than negligence. When cells overflowed, there was no choice but to pile men like firewood and leave them to endure. Your companion shivers, and the sound rattles through your own bones. You mimic his curled posture, tucking your knees tight, arms folded in. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, you feel the frost lift a little. The space between you fills with a damp warmth. The smell isn't pleasant. Sweat, old straw, unwashed cloth, but you accept it gladly, like a traveler accepting muddy water after days in the desert. Time stretches. Your ear presses against his shoulder blade, and you can hear his heart, slow but steady. In this moment, this stranger's pulse is as comforting as a lullaby. The cold equalized everyone. Chains and frost didn't care about titles. You might imagine a knight and a beggar lying back to back, their rank erased by necessity. But the night is long, and even shared warmth is fragile. Your companion twitches and rolls away. The cold air rushes in immediately, like an enemy reclaiming ground. Pride whispers no, but the ache in your bones insists yes. Sheepishly, you shuffle closer, reclaiming what little heat you can. It is an unspoken bargain. We do not speak of this, but we need it all the same. For now, you let yourself rest in the fragile comfort of another living body. The air in this part of the castle feels different. The damp still clings to your skin, but there is something else, an echo, a rhythm. You quiet your breathing, and you catch it, the low drone of voices somewhere above you. They are not the muttering of prisoners, but the chants of monks. Their prayers roll down the stone stairwell in syllables you don't understand. The sound wavers between comforting and eerie, as if the prayers themselves are hovering between heaven and hell. The cell you occupied tonight is not in the main fortress, but in a converted religious building. This was common. Monasteries, after all, were sturdy structures, already equipped with thick walls and lockable rooms. When kings or lords needed extra space for captives, it was easy to transform cloisters into prisons. You lean against the wall and feel the faint vibration of the chant, as if the stone itself is humming along. Accounts from the period make it clear that many religious houses doubled as jails. Papal records describe monks who were tasked with keeping heretics under guard. Their cells echoed not only with prayers, but with the coughs of the condemned. Some abbots even rented out their unused chambers to local authorities, turning prayer rooms into profit. It was not unusual to find a prisoner forced to kneel on cold flagstones while vespers sounded just overhead. And there's an odd little story preserved in a 14th century chronicle. In one English priory, prisoners were locked so close to the chapel that they began mimicking the chants, shouting half-learned verses through the grates. The guards called it mockery, but some of the monks claimed it was evidence of repentance. Imagine that, prayer as entertainment, in a place where boredom gnawed worse than hunger. Researchers remain divided on what the monks themselves felt about this arrangement. Did they view the prisoners as lost souls, deserving of guidance even in chains? Or were they simply burdened hosts, forced to house dangerous men beside their libraries? The written evidence is scarce, and the tone shifts from compassion to irritation, leaving us unsure. You stretch out on your straw and listen. The chant rises and falls like waves. For a moment, the chill of the cell seems less sharp. The rhythm has a hypnotic quality, almost like a lullaby. But then the voice is cut off, replaced by a silence so complete it feels violent. The absence of the sound reminds you forcefully of just how alone you are. The smell here is different too, not just the stench of the dungeon, but tinged with beeswax from the candles above and the drifting smoke of incense seeping through the cracks. It mixes strangely with the odor of mildew and unwashed bodies. A bell rings above, its tone muffled by layers of stone. Midnight vigils, perhaps. The monks rise for their prayers, and you lie shivering, wondering if they spare even a thought for the captives beneath them. Are you buried alive beneath holy song? Modern historians continue to debate whether these religious settings were kinder or crueler than a standard castle dungeon. Some argue the proximity to prayer gave captives a thin strand of spiritual comfort, even as their bodies froze. Others insist it only heightened the cruelty, hearing salvation sung above you while you sat chained in darkness. Both interpretations ring true as the night lengthens. Sleep comes in fragments. You drift off to the cadence of monks repeating Kyrie eleison, only to wake when the chant ceases and the silence feels unbearable. You are marched up a spiral staircase that smells of rust and then shoved into a chamber deeper in the castle keep. This one is different again. The walls soar higher, the air feels colder, and the torch on the wall burns with a sullen, uneven flame. You realize this is no improvised cell. This is a proper royal dungeon, the kind that stories whisper about. Here, stone is not only the floor beneath you, it is the bed, the chair, the blanket, and the coffin all rolled into one. The walls drip with condensation, tiny trails of moisture running into the grooves of the flagstones. You look for straw or a plank, but there is nothing. Only bare rock, worn smooth by centuries of human weight pressing into it. Chroniclers from the late Middle Ages make it clear that these dungeons were designed to intimidate as much as to restrain. They weren't just holding spaces, they were stage sets for power. They were reminders that the Lord controlled life and death. From the Tower of London to the Chateau d'If, the pattern repeated. The dungeon's cold was as famous as its chains. One curious account from a 13th century traveler describes prisoners in Rouen Castle who swore the stones themselves sucked the warmth from a man like leeches. The chronicler didn't argue. He simply noted that those who entered pale left paler still. You run your palm across the flagstone and feel that same pull, as though the floor has a hunger all its own. Experts remain divided on whether these rooms were meant to be quite so unbearable. Some architectural historians argue that the design was practical. Fortification first, comfort irrelevant. The depth of the keep, The narrowness of the windows, these were for defense. Others believe the design was intentional cruelty, exploiting drafts and darkness as unspoken instruments of punishment. Whichever is correct, the result is the same. Your body trembles uncontrollably, even before night has fully fallen. As darkness gathers, you notice the acoustics are different here. Every movement echoes grotesquely. When you shift, your chains jangle, and the sound ricochets off the vaulted ceiling like mockery. Even your breathing feels too loud. The smell is sharper, too. Without straw to absorb the filth, waste, and sweat soaked directly into the stone, producing a sour, mineral stench that burns your nostrils. You lie flat, pressing your shoulder blades into the rock. The sensation is shocking. It is simply relentless, a pressure that doesn't change no matter how you shift. Hours pass, and your flesh feels bruised, your bones aching, as though the stone is shaping itself into you. Above, faintly, you hear the life of the castle. Boots crossing wooden floors, a dog barking, the creak of a portcullis. All of it drifts down like memories from a world you no longer belong to. You wonder if the royalty in their chambers, with their fires and tapestries, have any thought for the people freezing below. Probably not. The dungeon is useful precisely because it is invisible. You shiver, realizing that in this place, imagination is the only warmth allowed. And then, a moment of grim humor. You think of the phrase some guards were said to use. The king's embrace. That's what they call this cold stone floor. Because once you lay upon it, it held you tighter than any lover, and let you go just as reluctantly. The iron has a voice of its own. Every time you move, it answers. A clink, a scrape, a dull thud against the stone. By now, this sound has become part of the night's soundtrack, joining the drips of water and the scurrying of rats. You pull gently against the chain, testing the links as if tonight might be the night they give way. They never do. They cut into your ankle with cold precision, a reminder that the only warmth you'll know in this cell comes from friction, not mercy. Written accounts from jails in England, France, and the Holy Roman Empire describe these iron shackles in meticulous detail. Prisoners were bound at the wrists, the ankles, or sometimes both. The weight varied. Some were fixed to the wall with short links, forcing the captive into a permanent crouch. Others, like yours, dragged heavy lengths of chain that scraped the floor wherever you moved. These restraints were not only about preventing escape, they were punishments in themselves. They reduced circulation, stiffened joints, and chilled the body as the metal turned icy in the damp air. An especially peculiar anecdote survives in the register of the Bishop of Ely's prison. One prisoner claimed he was so cold that he pressed his wrists to the shackles deliberately, hoping the friction would spark a feeling of warmth. Of course, the metal only burned colder. You imagine his desperation and almost understand it. Even pain feels like heat compared to the numb ache of this dungeon. Specialists can't quite agree on whether chains were applied universally or selectively. Some suggest every prisoner was shackled as a matter of course. Others argue it depended on rank and offense. Nobles might be spared the irons, while thieves and debtors bore them constantly. The evidence is patchy, but tonight you know only one truth. The shackles are mercilessly real. You stretch your legs, and the chain tugs taut. The iron ring in the floor grinds, a squeal that echoes in the darkness. You try to adjust your position, to curl your knees up, but the links allow only so much movement. Soon, your thighs burn with the effort of finding a posture that simply doesn't exist. The cold of the iron sinks deeper into your skin until it feels fused with you. You scratch at the raw spots, but there's no relief. Only the sense that you are tearing open wounds that will never heal in this place. The iron itself has an odor. Sharp, metallic, almost like blood. It mixes with the mildew and straw until the air feels heavy, flavored with rust. You try to distract yourself with memory. You picture fields of green, sun warming your shoulders, bare feet on soft earth. You stretch in that imagined space, arms wide, legs free. But the moment your real foot jerks against the iron, the fantasy shatters. The chain is louder than your mind. Sleep comes only in fragments, each one broken by the pressure of metal against bone. Sometimes you jerk awake because your leg is gone numb, the blood cut off by the band of iron. You shake it out, hear the rattle again, and realize how fully your nights now belong to the chain. And so the night continues with its perverse lullaby. Drip, scrape, clink, thud. You begin to recognize rhythms in it, almost like music. The dungeon becomes a twisted concert hall, your suffering its only symphony. The night presses on. But it isn't the cold or the chains that gnaw at you now. It's the smell. When you first entered this chamber, your nose wrinkled, but you thought, perhaps, you might grow accustomed to it. You were wrong. The odor only grows stronger with every passing hour, as though the walls themselves are sweating rot. You inhale cautiously and taste the mildew on your tongue, sour and metallic. The straw you once cursed has begun to blacken in the corners, soaking up urine, sweat, and the occasional vomit from prisoners too weak to crawl toward the slop bucket. Descriptions from contemporary records leave little doubt. Medieval dungeons were as much olfactory assaults as they were physical ones. Clerks wrote of jails where the stench alone was enough to kill a man not yet sentenced. In some castles, visitors reportedly fainted before they even reached the lower chambers. The odor was not incidental. It was a constant, woven into the fabric of imprisonment. You lie on your back and realize that every breath is a punishment, every inhalation a reminder of decay. Curiously enough, some accounts describe guards joking about the perfume of justice. They claimed the smell kept the curious away and discouraged prisoners from attempting escape through narrow drains or shafts. You can almost picture a smirking warden insisting the stench was part of the king's security plan. As for how intentional these conditions were, researchers remain divided. Some argue the filth was simply unavoidable. A limited water supply, no ventilation, and endless overcrowding. Others believe the neglect was deliberate. The worse the conditions, the more terrifying the reputation of the castle. That reputation, in turn, served as a deterrent. Both possibilities feel plausible as your stomach turns and you choke back bile. The air hangs heavy, as if the dungeon itself is a lung exhaling poison. You catch faint whiffs of other layers too. The tang of rust from the chains, the musk of unwashed bodies, and beneath it all, the unmistakable Swedish stench of death. Somewhere nearby, you think, a body has lain too long unclaimed. You press your sleeve to your face, but the cloth reeks as well. The smell clings, it seeps, it insists. At some point, a rat emerges from the shadows, its nose twitching. It scampers across your chest before darting toward the corner where the slot bucket overflows. You freeze, then exhale. The rat is unfazed, and you realize with grim acceptance that it, too, is part of the ecosystem of this prison. Rats feast, fleas thrive, and mold spreads, all while you struggle simply to breathe. There is still disagreement among historians about how much this smell affected survival. Some argue it was demoralizing, breaking spirits more effectively than whips. Others note the spread of disease, suggesting the foul air hastened death by pneumonia or plague. In either case, the conclusion is the same. Prisoners didn't just sleep in the cold. They slept in filth that invaded their lungs with every sigh. You roll to your side, but the smell follows as though it clings to your hair. You bury your face in your arm, wishing for the freshness of grass or even the acrid smoke of a fire. Anything but this. The scratching wakes you before dawn. At first, you think it's just the chains or another prisoner stirring. But then you catch the rhythm. Tiny claws, sharp and relentless, moving across the straw and stone. Your eyes adjust to the gloom, and you see it. A rat, bold as a tax collector, nosing around the corner of your bedding. Its whiskers twitch. Its eyes gleam faintly in the torchlight filtering from the corridor. You freeze, though you know it isn't fear that stops you. It's fatigue. You simply don't have the strength to chase it away. Surviving records tell us that rodents were constant companions in medieval jails. Rats thrived in the same conditions that destroyed humans: filth, dampness, and abundant scraps of rotting food. Prisoners often complained that the animals didn't just share their space. They claimed their meager meals, gnawed their clothes, and sometimes nipped at fingers and toes in the dead of night. To live in a cell was to live in a colony, half human, half rodent. And yet, one strange story from a German chronicle tells of a prisoner who supposedly befriended the rats. He fed them crumbs so they would leave him unbitten while he slept. Supposedly, the creatures learned to gather around him in silence, a living fur blanket against the cold. Whether the tale is true or not, it suggests something profound. Even vermin could become allies when loneliness and frost press too hard. You watch your rat circle closer and wonder, absurdly, if he might curl up beside you. As for how the authorities regarded this infestation, experts are divided. Some argue that guards saw the rats as part of the punishment. Let the beasts gnaw. It saved on whips. Others insist the animals were simply unavoidable, too numerous and too hardy to keep out of any stone structure. Archaeological digs at castle sites reveal their bones and droppings even in storerooms. The rat darts forward, sniffing at your ankle. You jerk. The chain rattles and the creature vanishes. But the sound echoes and more eyes blink open in the dark corners. You realize there isn't just one. There are dozens, all biding their time. Their movements weave through the silence until the dungeon feels alive with a secret society. Another prisoner stirs, cursing as a rat scuttles over him. He kicks at the straw, chains clanging angrily. The rats scatter, but they return just as quickly. They know patience. They know hunger. And here lies the cruel truth. After hours of shivering, you begin to understand the appeal of their warmth. You imagine the German tale again, the prisoner sleeping beneath a quilt of fur, tiny hearts beating in unison with his own. Could you do it? Could you let them climb over you, all for the sake of heat? You shake your head, revolted. Yet the longer you shiver, the more that question lingers. Historians continue to puzzle over how prisoners coped. Some accounts describe endless nights of scratching and swatting, sleepless in defense of one's toes. Others hinted resignation, of men who stopped resisting, allowing the rats to crawl freely as long as they didn't bite too hard. Fatigue wins. You close your eyes, knowing they are still there. You hear their feet on the straw, their claws on the stone. The sound becomes part of the night's music, and your body surrenders. In this cell, they are your equals, and perhaps, though you never admit it, your companions. Tonight, something different greets you. When the guard slams the iron door, he tosses a ragged bundle into the straw. At first, you think it's just waistcloth, but when you unfurl it, you realize it's meant to be a blanket, or at least the cruel parody of one. The cloth is threadbare, its edges unraveling. It smells as though it has passed through a dozen other cells before yours. Still, your fingers trace the frayed threads, and you clutch it tightly. In a dungeon, even the illusion of warmth feels like treasure. Written accounts confirm that prisoners were rarely given proper bedding. When scraps of cloth were handed down, it was usually old uniforms or discarded sackcloth. Chronicles from the 14th century even mention coats of shame, garments stripped from executed men and recycled into coverings for the living. Imagine wrapping yourself in a dead man's tunic, hoping his scent might keep the rats away. That is the level of comfort these scraps offered. An odd anecdote survives from Florence, where a debtor in the city jail supposedly stitched together a quilt out of parchment scraps smuggled in by friends. He survived the winter under that bizarre creation, sleeping beneath contracts, letters, and holy verses inked onto sheepskin. The image lingers. Paper warmed him when no wool could be spared. As for whether blankets were common, scholars are uncertain. Some point to prison inventories that list textiles, but others argue these were bribes or privileges, not standard issue. You drape the cloth over your shoulders, and the first shock is how cold it feels. Instead of shielding you, it seems to trap the dampness against your skin. The weave is so thin that drafts pass straight through it. Still, you cling to it. The weight, however feeble, is something to hold on to. The smell, though, is almost unbearable. Sweat, mildew, and something darker cling to every fiber. You bury your nose in it and gag, then force yourself to continue. The alternative is surrendering to the cold. Survival often comes down to choosing which misery you can endure longer. Tonight, you choose stink over frostbite. The other prisoners notice. One mutters in envy. Another asks for a corner of it. You hesitate, then share, stretching the blanket so thin it becomes little more than a cobweb between you. The warmth is negligible, but the gesture builds an unspoken alliance. A scrap of cloth becomes the currency of trust. As the night deepens, you shift endlessly beneath the rag. No position feels right. The blanket slides, tangles, or clings damply to your chest. You keep adjusting because the act itself wards off despair. You are doing something, however futile, to fight the cold. Historians argue about whether such coverings were symbolic rather than practical. Some suggest they represented a sliver of mercy. Others believe they were strategic, keeping captives alive but weak, balanced on the knife edge between survival and collapse. This rag is a reminder that you are allowed to suffer, but perhaps not allowed to die too quickly. By dawn, the cloth is soaked with your own sweat and the cell's condensation. It clings heavily like swamp water. You peel it off, disgusted. But when the draft cuts across your bare shoulders, you clutch it back, pressing it to your skin once more. That is the final lesson this rag teaches you. In a dungeon, comfort is relative. What disgusts you tonight may save you tomorrow. You think you have grown used to the rhythm of these nights, but the seasons have a way of rewriting every rule. Tonight, winter has fully claimed the dungeon. The cold feels different. It is sharper, hungrier. It doesn't just creep into your bones, it pierces them, as if each gust of wind through the arrow slit carries knives. You curl beneath your ragged scrap of blanket, press your knees tight, and still your teeth chatter so hard you fear they'll crack. Chroniclers left plenty of testimony about how the seasons transformed prison life. In summer, the cells became suffocating ovens, the heat trapped by the stone, the air thick with disease and flies. Captives, slick with sweat, licked condensation from the walls for relief. But in winter, the cells became ice boxes. Breath hung visibly in the air, forming clouds that never dissipated. Some accounts claim that in particularly brutal winters, prisoners woke to find frost clinging to their eyebrows and beards, as though the night had painted them into statues. You run your fingers along your own face, half expecting to feel the crystals forming. One particularly strange note appears in a 15th century London jail record. Guards joked that the frost does the whipping for us. The implication was cruelly simple. Why bother punishing captives when the weather itself could do the job? And yet, scholars remain divided over whether medieval builders understood how brutal these seasonal shifts would be. Some suggest castles were so focused on defense, thick walls, deep vaults, that comfort was never a consideration. Others argue that this misery was embraced as part of the punishment, an invisible lash dealt by the climate itself. You shift, but the straw beneath you has stiffened with frost. Each stalk crunches like glass, biting into your skin. Every surface, stone, straw, iron, has turned into an accomplice of the cold. Hunger makes it worse. With no fuel in your body, the shivers eventually fade into a weakness, a stillness that is more dangerous than sleep. The sounds of the cell tell their own story of the season. Prisoners cough more often now, a hacking, wet sound. Someone wheezes, each breath a struggle. You think of the summer and you almost laugh. Then you would have traded everything for a breath of this cool air. Now, in December, you would give anything for the sting of that summer heat. That is the cruel symmetry of the dungeon. You always long for what is gone. Some historians propose that prisoners developed their own rituals to cope. They would sleep in shifts, rotating body heat, or gathering in tight groups. Letters smuggled from debtors' prisons hint at men pressing back to back, not out of friendship, but sheer survival. The man beside you stirs and inches closer. At first you tense, but then you feel his shoulder against yours, radiating a faint warmth. You don't resist. Neither of you speaks, but the gesture says what words cannot. Pride has no place here. At some point, your body stops shivering. This frightens you more than the trembling did. You've heard tales of men who froze to death precisely when they thought the cold was easing. A deceptive comfort, a soft descent into stillness. You slap your arms, rub your thighs, anything to keep the circulation alive. Even pain feels like a victory against the numbness. You are trapped in a place where the seasons are not blessings, but new forms of punishment. You whisper to yourself, "Endure." The word echoes, a fragile mantra against the stone. The guards shove you into a new chamber. At first, you were too dazed to notice the difference. The door slams, but then your eyes adjust. This isn't the dripping pit of the dungeon. The walls here are smooth, whitewashed, and decorated with faded tapestries. A fireplace yawns in the corner, its embers still faintly glowing. For a moment, you wonder if you've been released. But no, the iron bars still gleam at the door. You haven't escaped prison. You've stumbled into the prison of the wealthy. Records from the medieval period make it clear that captivity was not experienced equally. Wealthy prisoners of war, noble hostages, or politically significant captives often slept in relative comfort. Feathers, cushions, even servants sometimes attended them. They were valuable after all, and a ransom demanded that they survive. Chroniclers in France wrote of knights, captured in battle, who spent their imprisonment in furnished chambers. Their only humiliation was the loss of freedom, not the loss of warmth. And there's an almost comical detail from a Burgundian court account. A captured noble complained not of chains or straw, but of the inferior wine served with his supper. His grievance was recorded seriously, as if a bad vintage were a legitimate form of suffering. You laugh under your breath, half from bitterness, half from the sheer absurdity. Experts still debate how widespread this luxury captivity truly was. Some argue these noble prisoners were the exception, highlighted in records precisely because they were unusual. Others believe it was standard practice among the elite, a reflection of a society where rank determined even the texture of your prison bed. You sit gingerly on the bed provided here, a real bed stuffed with feathers. The mattress sighs beneath your weight, soft in a way your body has nearly forgotten. Relief washes through you. Your aching joints sink into the down. The blanket is heavy and warm. The fire crackles, weak but real. You inhale greedily. It smells of wood, not waste. But the comfort is unsettling. You can't help but think of the others, The men and women still freezing on stone, gnawed by rats, gasping in filth. Their misery echoes in your memory, and suddenly the softness beneath you feels almost shameful. It whispers of privilege and luck. The guard returns with a tray. Coarse bread, yes, but bread that hasn't been touched by vermin, and a cup of watered wine. You eat in silence, reminded that you have been thrust into a category apart, the prisoner whose survival matters. Yet peace here has its own barbs. You hear footsteps above, the voices of courtiers laughing. Life continues just overhead, reminding you that your gilded prison is still a cage. Researchers point out that this privileged confinement sometimes softened captives into collaborators. Treated well, they were more likely to sign treaties or reveal secrets. It was never pure kindness. It was strategy, wrapped in velvet. You lie back, but the bed feels too soft. It makes your back ache in new ways. Your body mistrusts the ease. Sleep comes reluctantly, your mind replaying the clatter of chains and the rustle of straw, as if comfort itself has become suspicious. Perhaps that is the final cruelty, to remind you what warmth feels like, only so you can dread its loss tomorrow. The comfort of the feather mattress fades quickly from memory. The guards drag you back down the spiral stairs, the air growing steadily colder until the sounds of the upper world fall away. You are pushed into a cell directly beneath the guardroom. You know this because of the noise overhead. Every creak of timber, every shift of boots, every lazy scrape of dice on the wooden table filters down through the cracks. The floor above becomes a constant ceiling of sound, reminding you that life goes on for your captors even as you shiver below. You lie on your straw, staring upward, listening. Men laugh at jokes you can't hear. Mugs clink, chairs scrape. The weight of their warmth presses down on you, audible but untouchable. Documentation from medieval prisons confirms this arrangement was common. It was practical, easy supervision, quick access, and it had the added cruelty of letting prisoners hear the world of freedom just out of reach. In the Tower of London, cells under the Beauchamp Tower echoed constantly with the guards' chatter, the thud of weapons being sharpened, and the roll of dice. The architecture itself ensured prisoners lived in a state of audible envy. A curious tale from a French castle describes a man who claimed he could tell time by the noises from the guard room. He knew dawn when the chairs scraped back for the morning shift. He knew noon when the mugs clattered with ale. And he knew midnight when the dice rattled one last time before silence fell. In the absence of sunlight, the rhythm of his jailers became his calendar. As for whether this was deliberate cruelty or mere convenience, scholars are still split. Some argue it was designed. What better reminder of power than forcing captives to hear guards laugh while they froze? Others believe it was simply logistical. Either way, your nights are haunted, not by silence, but by the reminder that warmth and ease exist directly overhead and not for you. The smell here is different again. Instead of pure mildew, the air carries the scent of smoke drifting down from the guard-room fire. It mingles with the stench of your cell, creating a cruel perfume. half comfort, half filth. Your stomach growls when the scent of roasted meat wafts through the cracks, and you almost laugh at the absurdity of hunger triggered by smells you'll never taste. You close your eyes, but the noise remains, pressing into your skull like an unwelcome lullaby. At one point, voices rise in a bawdy song. The melody filters through the stone, muffled but insistent. You find yourself humming along, despite yourself, until a boot stomps in rhythm and laughter follows, reminding you that the singers above would never share their warmth with the shivering below. Psychologists suggest that hearing life so close but unreachable intensifies despair, breaking spirits faster than isolation. Others argue it offered a thread of connection, preventing madness. Listening now, you feel both. The night passes, not in solitude, but in endless awareness of others' comfort. You learn to measure time, not by light, but by boots on planks and laughter carried through cracks. You think the guard room's chatter is the worst soundtrack imaginable, but tonight the castle proves you wrong. Once the corridors above fall silent, another kind of noise begins to fill the darkness. At first, it's faint, an uneven moan drifting from somewhere down the hall. Then, as your ears sharpen, the whole dungeon becomes a theater of voices, sobs, songs, prayers, curses, and the unearthly scrape of chains dragging across stone. Written descriptions from medieval prisons revealed that nights were rarely silent. Jails were packed with people from every background: soldiers, thieves, debtors, heretics, beggars, children, and each brought their own sounds of misery. Chroniclers in Florence noted that the prison near the Ponte Vecchio could be heard from the street outside, its chorus of weeping and wailing carrying through the windows like a grotesque lullaby. Tonight, you understand how that could be true. The walls themselves seem to breathe with voices. An especially odd anecdote comes from a 15th century Spanish account. A jailer reported that prisoners once tried to drown out their own despair by singing hymns together. The guards called it mockery, but one monk insisted it was proof of faith surviving in darkness. You listen closely and you swear you hear something similar. Two men murmuring a tune that might be prayer, might be parody, drifting into harmony before dissolving into coughing fits. As for whether this nightly chorus was tolerated, historians wrestle with the evidence. Some argue jailers allowed the noise as long as it didn't threaten escape. Better to let prisoners exhaust themselves with shouting. Others believe silence was enforced harshly. All you know is that your own night is pierced by voices you cannot escape. A man in the corner mutters endlessly, words looping back on themselves until they blur into nonsense. Another calls out for his mother, the syllables ragged and heartbreaking. You cover your ears, but the stone amplifies every sound. And then, cutting through the misery, comes laughter. It startles you, sharp, sudden, and high, bordering on madness. Yet it spreads, echoing down the corridor. You feel your own lips twitch. Is it contagion, or is there something genuinely funny about this shared doom? The laughter fades as quickly as it began, leaving a silence so heavy you almost miss the wailing. Modern researchers note the psychological effects of such soundscapes. Constant noise breaks sleep, frays nerves and erode sanity. It is itself a form of torture. Yet, others suggest it reminded prisoners they were not alone, that shared suffering was a fragile kind of comfort. You feel both interpretations at once.
At one point, a deep, resonant voice begins to chant a ballad of lost battles. You close your eyes and let the melody wash over you. For a moment, it feels like sitting by a hearth, listening to a bard. Then the man coughs, and the illusion shatters. The night ends not with silence, but with exhaustion. The voices weaken, fade into snores, and the eerie stillness of bodies that may never stir again.
Your stomach has been gnawing at itself for days, but tonight the hunger feels sharper because of the smell. Somewhere, high above in the castle kitchens, a feast is being prepared. The draft through the arrow slit, usually just a carrier of cold, now brings whispers of roasting meat and herbs, the kind of aroma that once meant celebration. Down here, it is torture. You close your eyes, but the scent lingers, wrapping around your ribs like a cruel reminder that you are starving. Accounts from medieval jails are unflinching about the rations. Bread, often moldy. Water, sometimes brackish. On rare occasions, a ladle of thin gruel. Civic records from Paris list prison diets as little more than crusts collected from markets. Chroniclers in England complained that debtors were left to starve unless friends or family sent food. Hunger wasn't an accident. It was part of the design. Prisoners were meant to be kept alive, but just barely. An unusual note comes from a Milanese record in the 14th century. A man jailed for theft reported dreaming nightly of the banquets he had once served as a kitchen boy. He swore the smells drifting into his cell were more vivid than any hallucinations, and claimed that in hunger, the imagination itself cooked meals for you. Lying here now, your mouth watering at phantom flavors, you understand precisely what he meant. Historians argue over whether this hunger was considered punishment or simple neglect. Some suggest deliberate rationing was a way to weaken captives, making escape impossible. Others point to evidence that prison keepers simply pocketed the food money, leaving inmates to fend for themselves. Your stomach doesn't care about the motives. You curl tighter under your scrap of blanket, trying to ignore the pangs. The straw beneath you rustles, and you imagine its bread crusts, golden and crisp. You picture lifting them to your mouth. Instead, your hand closes on brittle stalks that crumble to dust. Around you, other prisoners mumble in their sleep. One repeats the word bread like a mantra. Another groans, cheese, cheese, until his voice fades. Hunger doesn't just torment the body, it haunts the mind, invading dreams until even sleep offers no refuge. You think back to meals you once took for granted. A stew bubbling over a fire, the scent of onions, a crust of bread warm enough to steam. The images rise unbidden, sharper than reality. Some modern researchers propose that starvation in prisons was psychological warfare. By keeping prisoners weak, jailers ensured their willpower dissolved. Hungry men are easier to control, easier to break. You try to distract yourself, but even the rats remind you of food. They scavenge more effectively than you. One darts past, carrying what looks like a crumb of bread. You almost lunge at it, but the chain on your ankle stops you short. The rat disappears, victorious. The hours drag. Your hunger sharpens into nausea, then dulls into a heavy ache. You know the stages. The first night brings pangs, the second weakness, the third a dangerous stillness. In this cell, starvation is not just about food. It is about teaching you that even your own body cannot be trusted. The hunger sharpens your awareness, but what grows strongest tonight isn't your stomach, it's your mind. You lie awake on the damp floor, and your thoughts refuse to stay quiet. You begin planning escape, as if imagining freedom might trick your body into feeling warm. Medieval chronicles are filled with failed escapes. Some tried to bribe guards with coins hidden in their boots. Others filed away at locks with bits of smuggled metal. A few, the most desperate, dug tunnels, scraping through stone and earth with spoons, bones, or even their bare hands. Most were caught. Yet the very act of planning gave them something to live for, a reason to survive one more night. You too start whispering schemes in your mind, building blueprints out of shadows. A peculiar story survives from a 14th century German town record. One man supposedly trained rats to gnaw at his wooden door by smearing it with bacon fat smuggled from his meager rations. For weeks he fed them, until the door finally weakened enough for him to slip through. Whether the tale is exaggerated or not, the idea is intoxicating. You look at the scurrying creatures in your own cell and wonder, allies or enemies? Experts disagree about how common escape attempts were from great castles. Some argue the thick walls and vigilant guards made most plans futile, turning fantasies into nothing more than nighttime distractions. Others insist escapes happened more often than records suggest, since authorities would be embarrassed to admit failure. The debate matters little to you. What matters is the faint flame of possibility that flares each time you trace the outline of your chain. You tug at the iron. Could you reach the wall? Could you chip at the mortar with the chain's edge? Your fingers itch with the idea. You imagine scratching night after night, patient as dripping water, until the stone gives way. Your body joins the fantasy. Each draft becomes a secret passage of air. Each rat hole, the mouth of a tunnel. You close your eyes and see yourself crawling through the earth, emerging into moonlight, gulping fresh air that doesn't stink of mildew. But then a cough breaks the spell. A prisoner across the chamber chuckles bitterly and mutters, "No one leaves." His words strike harder than the cold. He has seen others try, seen them fail. The fantasy dims, but it doesn't extinguish. You cling to it, because without it, the night offers nothing but despair. Modern researchers describe this as mental survival. Captives kept themselves alive not by strength of body, but by strength of imagination. Some prisoners scribbled verses on the walls. Others carved ships or animals into the stone, turning fantasy into art. You run your fingers along the wall, searching for soft mortar. You scratch once, dust falls under your nail. It feels like a tiny victory. You keep scratching. The rhythm calms you, gives your restless thoughts a purpose. The night has taught you something cruel but essential. The mind is the only escape a prisoner can guarantee. And as long as you keep dreaming, you carry a spark the dungeon cannot steal. The cold is bad enough. The hunger is cruel. But nothing quite compares to the night you spend knowing tomorrow might be your last. Word spreads quickly, a whisper that slithers through cracks and corridors. Someone is to be executed at dawn. And then the realization settles, cold and heavy. It's you. From that moment, sleep becomes a stranger. You lie on your straw, listening to the rasp of your own breath, and the cell feels tighter than ever. The stone presses in, the chains feel heavier, and every drip of water sounds like the ticking of a clock. You are trapped not only by walls, but by time itself. Contemporary records tell us that the eve of execution was deliberately cruel. Some prisoners were left in total darkness, denied even their meager food, forced to dwell on their fate. Others were paraded before fellow captives, a grim warning. The Tower of London's registers describe how condemned men were sometimes moved to colder, deeper cells on their final night. The chill itself acted as an unspoken rehearsal for the grave. A peculiar anecdote survives from a Burgundian account. One man, scheduled for hanging, reportedly sang all night, his voice echoing through the jail until the guards begged him to stop. He refused, claiming he wanted his last memory to be his own song, not their silence. You wonder if you should do the same, but your throat feels dry. Historians still debate how much forewarning captives were given. Some believe they knew their fate days in advance, enduring prolonged psychological torment. Others argue executions were often surprises, sprung without notice to prevent escape attempts. The uncertainty makes it worse. But tonight, you know, and that knowledge gnaws harder than the hunger. You try to rest, but every position reminds you of the morning. Lying flat feels like a corpse laid out. Curling tight feels like begging. Sitting up makes you dizzy, as if the rope already squeezes your neck. Your imagination betrays you. Every creak of wood becomes the scaffold being built. Every rustle of straw, the shuffle of the executioner's boots. The cell grows colder, though you cannot tell if it's the night or your own fear. You clutch the ragged blanket, pulling it over your head like a child, but the darkness inside is worse. You throw it off, shivering. Nothing shields you from tomorrow. Around you, the other prisoners are restless. Some whisper prayers. Others murmur encouragement you don't believe. Their voices echo like a chorus of ghosts, and you realize that soon you will join them, not as flesh, but as memory. Modern researchers note that death row insomnia was nearly universal. Few slept. Those who did woke screaming. Some left graffiti, final scratches on the walls, names, prayers, desperate sketches. Archaeologists have uncovered these marks, carved with fingernails of broken pottery. You glance at your wall, but your hands tremble too much to etch. You count your breaths, each one a fragile treasure. 20, 30, 40. Each a reminder that you are still here. And when the door finally creaks open and boots thud towards you, you flinch, but do not rise. The guard looks at you with an expression you can't read: pity, contempt, or just boredom. He doesn't need to speak. The sound of the key in the lock tells you enough. The night has given you no rest, only an endless rehearsal of death. The night after an execution always carries a different weight. Whether you were the one left behind or you simply witnessed it, the dungeon seems altered, its air thicker. Tonight, you are still here, but the shadow of what you've seen clings to your skin. The cold presses harder, and you wonder if fear itself makes you feel colder. Reports from medieval chronicles often describe disease spreading like wildfire in these places. Captives, already weakened by frostbite, malnutrition, and untreated wounds, quickly succumb to fevers. Physicians rarely entered prisons. Healers considered them breeding grounds for contagion. One English monk wrote that to step inside a jail was to inhale death with every breath. You cough into your sleeve, and the burning in your chest suggests he was not exaggerating. There is a grim little story from an Italian source about a physician who was bribed to examine prisoners during a winter plague. He declared them all beyond help, but not before he pocketed payment from each man. Weeks later, he was found dead himself, struck by the same fever he had mocked. The tale is told with a dark irony, as if to suggest the dungeon's curse spares no arrogance. Specialists remain divided on how deliberate this neglect was. Some argue that authorities genuinely feared infection and avoided close contact. Others believe withholding care was purposeful, another layer of punishment in a system designed not to kill outright, but to grind men down slowly. You don't need scrolls to confirm the truth. You can see it. The man to your left has sores on his ankles where the shackles have rubbed the flesh raw. He winces whenever he shifts, but no one tends to him. Another prisoner, further down, hacks endlessly, his body trembling with fever. The straw around him is damped with sweat. No one moves to help him. To touch him might mean catching the same affliction. In this place, compassion is a luxury few can afford. You pull your own rags tighter, but the chill still seeps in. Your fingers ache, stiff and red, your nails darken from bruises. You try rubbing them, blowing on them, but nothing staves off the numbness. You know the line between being cold and catching a fever is dangerously thin. The stench is worse tonight. Illness has its own odor, sour, metallic, heavy. It mixes with the rot, and the air feels poisonous. Modern historians debate the mortality rates. Some suggest most captives lasted only weeks before illness claimed them. Others insist survival often stretched into years if luck or bribery brought small comforts. You think of remedies you once knew: hot broth, clean bandages, herbs steeped in water. You imagine them vividly. These fantasies bring fleeting comfort, but they also sharpen the despair. Nothing of that kind exists here. At some point, the man with the fever falls silent. The stillness around him is deafening. You don't need to check. You can feel it in the air. Another body for the guards to drag away in the morning. And lying there, you realize how little separates you from him. Just a few degrees of warmth. Just one night survived, instead of surrendered. The cell door groans open again, And this time, the guards shove in a figure so small you think at first it must be a bundle of rags. Only when the shape shifts and a thin whimper escapes do you realize it's a child. The boy stumbles forward, barefoot, no more than 12, maybe younger. His eyes are wide, darting around the shadows. You see the raw red of his feet against the frozen stone. The door slams shut before he can even turn back. Chroniclers from London's Newgate and Paris's Châtelet both mention children among the imprisoned. Some were held for theft, a loaf of bread, a scrap of cloth. Others were simply the sons or daughters of debtors, locked in alongside parents who couldn't pay. In many records, there is no distinction made between the old and the young. The cell absorbed them all. Tonight, you see that reality embodied in the shivering boy hugging his knees. One odd, cruel tale survives in the municipal accounts of Lübeck, where a jailer noted that children sometimes became playthings for the guards. They would toss scraps to them as if feeding dogs, laughing to watch the little hands scramble across the filthy straw. You glance at the boy and can almost hear that cruel laughter. Modern researchers argue over whether this was common. Some claim children were often spared the worst conditions, held separately. Others insist overcrowding forced everyone together, regardless of age. The debate matters little as you watch the boy shudder in the same straw you sleep on, lice already crawling toward his bare skin. He curls against the wall, tucking his face into his arms. You feel the instinct to reach out, to share your scrap of blanket, but hesitation claws at you. Resources here are survival. 1 inch less of cloth could tip you closer to death. Yet when he coughs, a dry, fragile sound, you find yourself sliding the edge of your rag toward him. He takes it silently, his eyes wide with the gratitude that shines through the grime. The cell feels different now. His presence magnifies the cruelty of every draft, every drip of water. You had grown numb to your own suffering, but seeing it mirrored in a child makes each misery fresh again. When a rat scurries across the floor, he gasps, shrinking back. Some scholars suggest the presence of children in cells hardened the adults, making them more feral and desperate. Others believe it softened them, sparking forgotten instincts of care. Tonight, you sense both. Some prisoners scowl, muttering about another mouth to share meager rations. Others shift closer, offering quiet murmurs of comfort. You close your eyes, but the boy's whimpering keeps you awake. It is a sound unlike the moans of grown men, thinner, sharper, cutting through the stone. You wake with your heart pounding from a dream of the boy walking barefoot across snow. By dawn, he is still curled beside you, smaller even than he seemed at first. His breath fogs faintly in the air, proof he has survived the night. And as you watch him stir, you realize the dungeon is not only a prison of bodies. It is a prison of innocence, swallowing even those who barely had a chance to live free. The boy's breathing steadies beside you, but another figure shuffles into the cell that same day. A man whose accent immediately marks him as foreign. His words stumble awkwardly through the local tongue, and when he curses, the syllables twist differently in his mouth. He mutters in a language you can't follow, but the tone is unmistakable. He is cold, and he is furious.
Medieval prisons did not discriminate by nationality. Sieges produced captives from far-off lands, and merchants who quarreled with lords often found themselves locked up far from home. Documents from English ports list Italians, Flemings, and Spaniards in cells beside locals.
These men endured not only the misery of the dungeon, but the added cruelty of being strangers in a climate their bodies were not built to withstand. One unusual anecdote survives from a French chronicle. A Saracen captive, captured during the Crusades, begged his guards for straw, not to sleep on, but to burn. Unable to believe that man could survive such nights without a fire, he allegedly wasted away within weeks, his system collapsing in the northern frost. You glance at the shivering man in your cell and wonder if his fate will be similar. Scholars are divided on how foreign prisoners were treated. Some argue they were afforded leniency, seen as valuable for ransom. Others insist they suffered worse, despised as outsiders with no kin nearby to bring bribes or food. Tonight, you see only one fact. The man is alone in a way even you have never felt. He mutters to himself, stamping his feet, trying to stir warmth into his limbs. His cloak is thin, more suited for a milder climate. You hear his teeth clatter. He scans the shadows with suspicion, startled by every cough, every rattle of chains. The child stirs, watching him. The foreigner notices, forces a weak smile, and mutters something soothing. The boy doesn't understand the words, but the tone transcends language. He leans back, reassured. The night drags on, and you listen to the man's voice, a strange lullaby weaving in and out of your understanding. Later, he falls silent, shivering so violently you fear he'll collapse. Without thinking, you nudge your scrap of blanket toward him. He hesitates, then takes a corner, clutching it to his chest. The gesture bridges the gap that language cannot. For a few hours, you are not locals and foreigners. You are just bodies fighting the same cold. Modern researchers speculate that such shared suffering forged fleeting bonds. But they also describe hostility and violence when food grew scarce. The balance was fragile. As dawn approaches, you realize the foreigner has fallen asleep. You watch him in the dim light. You realize that in this place, captivity erases borders. Language and homeland mean little. Cold, hunger, and despair are fluent in every tongue.
The foreigner's mutterings fade, but the dungeon isn't finished. Tonight, new noises slither through the corridors. Sounds that don't belong to song or prayer or even the rattling of chains.
They are sharper, shorter, punctuated by cries that cut the silence like knives. You recognize them slowly, with a dread settling in your stomach. Somewhere nearby, someone is being tortured. Written accounts of castles often describe chambers dedicated not to sleeping, but to breaking. These rooms were never far from the cells, because the suffering was meant to be heard. Chroniclers of the Tower of London note that moans and screams served as warnings, drifting down corridors to remind prisoners what disobedience cost. Tonight, that warning is loud. A disturbing anecdote comes from a 14th century Nuremberg record. Prisoners claimed they could tell which device was being used by the pitch of the screams. The rack produced long, stretched howls. The whip drew shorter cries. You hear the echoes now and shudder, realizing you are involuntarily trying to make the same guesses. Experts remain uncertain whether torture was as frequent as legend claims. Some argue the devices were more symbolic, used sparingly to inspire fear. Others insist it was routine, woven into the fabric of interrogation. Your body doesn't care for statistics. The sounds are real, and each one feels like a blade pressed against your own skin. The child beside you stirs, covering his ears with his tiny hands. The foreigner mutters angrily, pacing the length of his chain, as if he could shout the cries away. You sit frozen, caught between horror and a strange, shameful relief. At least tonight, the screams belong to someone else. The smell seems sharper, too. Smoke, perhaps, or burning oil drifts faintly through the cracks. You gag as it mingles with the mildew, conjuring images you'd rather not imagine. The screams rise again, higher, sharper, before cutting off suddenly. The silence that follows is worse than the noise. You hold your breath, waiting. Footsteps echo, heavy and slow, as if dragging something. A door slams, and the dungeon exhales into quiet again. The boy's eyes are wide, glistening with fear. You whisper something soft, just noise to fill the silence. He leans closer, burying his face in your shoulder. Some historians argue that hearing torture without seeing it was more damaging. The imagination fills in the gaps with horrors more vivid than reality. The foreigner begins to sing softly in his own tongue. The words mean nothing, but the tone steadies the air. The song rises and falls, fighting the memory of screams with melody. You close your eyes, but even your dreams are tainted, filled with corridors, shadows, and the grotesque blend of torment and laughter. In a dungeon, even when pain belongs to someone else, you share it. The stone carries every echo. The echoes of torture linger in your skull. But tonight, the dungeon brings a different lesson. When the iron door creaks open, another captive is shoved inside. You notice instantly that she is not like the others. Her skirt, though torn, still clings around her legs. A shawl is wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She is a woman, and in this place, that detail changes everything. Historical records confirm that women, though fewer in number, did end up in medieval prisons. Some were accused of theft or witchcraft, others of heresy, and many simply inherited the debts of their husbands. A 14th century record from York lists a laundress jailed for stealing cloth she was never paid to wash. In Paris, women accused of gossiping too boldly about officials could find themselves in a dank cell. The presence of women didn't soften the dungeon, it often sharpened its cruelty. A curious account from Lübeck describes women making use of their clothing to survive the cold. Skirts became blankets, shawls doubled as cushions, and long hair was braided thick to keep the neck warm. You watch the woman in your cell settle into her corner, pulling her shawl tight, arranging her skirt over her legs as if building a small fortress of fabric against the frost. Researchers are divided on whether female prisoners received better treatment. Some suggest guards allowed them more cloth, pitying their fragility. Others argue the opposite, that they were mocked more harshly, their discomfort considered entertaining. The boy watches her with wide eyes, as though surprised to see softness in such a place. The foreigner mutters a greeting. She nods, but says nothing, curling deeper into her shawl. Silence is its own defense here. The night stretches on, and you notice her shifting, trying to fold her skirts beneath her to ward off the cold of the floor. Each movement sends the faintest whisper of fabric across the stone, a sound so out of place it almost feels like music. You see that clothing here is more than modesty. It is weaponry against the elements. At some point, she notices the boy shivering violently. Without hesitation, she pulls a corner of her own shawl over his shoulders. He leans against her gratefully, and for the first time in weeks, you see something rare, tenderness blooming in the dark. The gesture stings you, not because it hurts, but because it reminds you how easily compassion can survive, even here. Some scholars suggest that women's presence introduced fragile networks of care. Others argue such gestures were fleeting, swallowed by the dungeon's hunger. Looking at the boy, resting beneath her shawl, you realize both might be true. The foreigner begins humming. This time, the woman joins softly, her voice low but steady, weaving an unfamiliar harmony. For a few minutes, the cell is less a dungeon and more a gathering of survivors, bound by the fragile threads of song and cloth. But comfort never lasts. A guard stumps past, shouts something crude, and the woman stiffens, pulling the shawl closer. Her clothing may shield her from the cold, but not from the gaze of men who see her as weaker prey. You realize survival here is not always about strength. Sometimes it is about fabric pulled tight, about shawls shared, about tenderness refusing to vanish. The woman's shawl still drapes the boy when the next prisoner arrives. This one is different again. Not ragged, but stiff-backed, his bearing marked by pride, even in chains. His cloak is patched, but was once fine. His hands are ink-stained rather than calloused. A political prisoner, you realize, captured not for theft, but for words or allegiance or schemes. He lowers himself onto the straw and is already fumbling for a scrap of parchment hidden in his sleeve. Surviving chronicles tell us that these detainees lingered for years, too valuable to kill, too dangerous to release. Some wrote poetry, some copied scripture, some kept diaries carved into the very walls. In France, a noble accused of treason etched entire verses into the limestone, his poem still visible centuries later. You watch this man now and see the same instinct. A strange anecdote from Scotland tells of a baron who, denied ink, mixed soot with his own saliva to write letters on the inside of his cloak. The guards mocked him for madness, but those markings were later found to hold coded plans. Researchers are split on whether such writings were tolerated. Some suggest jailers ignored it, considering poetry harmless. Others argue scribbling could be dangerous, a means of passing messages and punishable by harsher chains. The man begins to recite under his breath. His voice is steady, melodic, even elegant. The words, though half mumbled, paint pictures of sunlight on battlements, of rivers thawing in spring, of freedom sketched like a dream. His tone is so calm it almost feels mocking, as though he refuses to acknowledge the cold gnawing at his bones. The noises of the dungeon seem to soften beneath his verses. Even the rats pause, whiskers twitching. Poetry becomes insulation, wrapping the cell in a rhythm no frost can breach. For a few minutes, you are not in filth, but in imagination. And yet, the irony bites deep. Here is a man who once debated lords, now scribbling into cloth like a schoolboy. Historians argue whether such verses were acts of rebellion or of survival. Some see them as quiet defiance, others as coping mechanisms. Both seem true. The verses are not just poetry, they are armor against the frost. The smell of mildew doesn't vanish, but for once it competes with the scent of memory. Ink, parchment, libraries untouched by frost. But reality never lets you linger. The guard stomps past, hears the murmuring, and bangs on the bars. "Shut your mouth," he barks. The poet falls silent, eyes lowered, yet his lips keep moving in tiny, soundless whispers. You realize then that poetry is more dangerous than it looks. Words can unsettle jailers more than rattling chains. By dawn, the poet is quiet, slumped against the wall, but the memory of his verses lingers, warming you in ways straw never could. You realize survival is about holding on to something the frost cannot freeze. The poet's whispers linger, but the next night brings a different kind of murmur. It starts faintly, almost lost under the coughing. A low hum, repeated phrases, words stitched together in rhythm. At first, you think it's another prisoner rambling into madness, but then you recognize the pattern. Prayer. Medieval records often mention the persistence of faith inside prisons. Men and women whispered psalms or muttered rosaries, even as chains bit into their ankles. A 14th century account from Avignon describes heretics praying all night, their voices echoing so steadily that the guards swore it haunted their dreams. Tonight, you hear that same cadence, a fragile rope thrown against despair. There's an odd story from Florence about a woman jailed for sorcery who recited the same psalm every evening. The other prisoners, annoyed at first, eventually joined in. What began as complaint turned into ritual, and the whole cell supposedly fell asleep each night to the same refrain. You wonder if the voice in your own darkness might do the same. As for whether faith truly eased suffering, scholars remain divided. Some argue prayer was a psychological balm, giving prisoners rhythm and purpose when nothing else remained. Others insist it only sharpened the torment, reminding captives of heaven's warmth while their bodies froze on stone. Lying here, you feel both sides at once. The woman who entered days before begins to join in, her voice soft but steady. The boy follows, stammering through words he half remembers. Even the foreigner hums along, his accent bending the syllables but blending into the harmony. The prayer becomes silent at first, but the rhythm draws you in. The prayer becomes less about faith and more about survival. Its repetition warms your chest like a fire you can't see. The smell of mildew still clings. The rats still skitter. But for a few minutes, those miseries dim under the weight of the chant. The dungeon becomes a chapel without light, a choir bound in iron. You close your eyes and the stone itself seems to hum back. The guards notice. One bangs on the bars, shouting for silence. The voices falter, but do not stop. The guard curses, throws a bucket of icy water into the straw, and storms off. You sit drenched, teeth chattering, but the chant rises again, stubborn as the frost. You realize then that prayer here is not just faith, it is rebellion. The hours creep forward. The chant never vanishes. It becomes your heartbeat, the fragile net that keeps despair from crushing you. Sleep arrives gently. You dream of churches, of sunlight streaming through colored glass, of warmth pooling on stone floors. You wake to none of it, only darkness and frost. But the memory clings like another blanket. You realize the cruel paradox. Prayer does not warm your body, but it warms your will. And in this place, sometimes the will to endure is the only warmth that matters. The day passes in silence. Night returns with its claws of frost. You brace for another sleepless stretch when the guard appears again. This time, he is carrying something that clinks softly. He tosses a bundle through the bars. You crawl forward. It's a blanket, but it was not given freely. The guard lingers, his palm open, waiting. Prison accounts from across Europe mention this unspoken system. Official rations rarely included bedding or firewood, but guards would sell scraps to those who could pay. A few coins, a promise of labor, or jewelry stripped from captives became the currency of warmth. In London's jails, the practice was so common it earned a nickname, buying the night. One odd story from a Flemish record tells of a prisoner who bartered away his shoes in exchange for a sheepskin. The skin stank, but he clung to it. He walked barefoot through the snow upon his release, yet swore he survived only because of that foul hide. Historians disagree on whether these exchanges were tolerated or condemned. Some argue the system was unofficially encouraged, padding the wages of underpaid keepers. Others claim it was simple corruption. Either way, you face the truth if you want warmth. The poet digs into his sleeve and produces a silver clasp, once part of his fine cloak. He presses it into the guard's palm. The blanket is shoved through the bars. The guard smirks, mutters something about comfort for the clever, and leaves. You unfold the cloth. It is coarse, heavy, and reeks of damp wool. But compared to the rags you've clutched before, it feels like luxury. The woman eyes it with longing. The boy with desperation. You know instantly this blanket is not just a tool, but a spark of tension. In this cell, every scrap of comfort becomes contested ground. You spread it over your own knees, then hesitate. The others watch, silent. At last, you tug the edges wide, inviting them beneath. One by one, they shift closer, until the four of you, the poet, The woman, the boy, and you huddle under its weight. The change is immediate. The warmth is faint but real. Your shoulders brush. Your breath mingles. The boy curls against your side, sighing softly. The dungeon is still cold, still foul, but beneath the blanket, you imagine a hearth. You imagine a cottage. The illusion lingers, just long enough to carry you toward sleep. Yet you know this blanket is no blessing. The poet has paid dearly, and tomorrow the guard will expect more. Comfort is never free in these walls. It is just another chain, softer but binding all the same. Warmth can always be bought, but never without debt. The coarse blanket lingers, but by nightfall it has already soaked up the stink of mildew and sweat. Yet none of you dare let go of it. When the torches are doused, you all shift closer, folding yourselves into the smallest space possible. There is a cruel rhythm to these hours. You fall into a half-sleep, your body jerking awake each time numbness creeps too far into your limbs. You toss, you turn, you chase warmth as if it were prey. The boy wriggles constantly, pressing into your ribs, then shifting away, then returning like a tide. The woman sighs each time the shawl slips from her shoulders. The foreigner mutters in his sleep, fists clenching the edge of the blanket. You, too, keep searching for a new position, one more twist, one more curl, anything to find comfort. Chroniclers described this restless ballet with bitter precision. In one English jail, a clerk wrote that the prisoners rolled like fish on a griddle, never still, ever chasing the corner of warmth that fled from them. You understand the image perfectly. No position lasts more than a few breaths before pain or chill forces another shift. A curious anecdote from a Venetian record tells of captives who devised a strange strategy. They took turns lying flat on the bottom while the others piled on top, bodies stacked like logs to trap heat. The man on the bottom endured agony, pressed against the stone. But when his shift ended, he became the warmer layer above. Scholars disagree on whether such contortions were conscious strategies or simple instinct. Some argue prisoners planned rotations carefully. Others suggest the movements were unconscious, desperate twitching in the fight against frost. Your body proves the theory true. You cannot stay still. The straw beneath you crunches. Fleas stir, biting your ankles as if scolding you for disturbing them. You slap at them, mutter curses, and curl tighter. Your chain scrapes the floor, the sound echoing. The blanket slides. You tug it up, but it drags across the foreigner's back. He grumbles, pulling the fabric closer to himself. You pull back. For a heartbeat, you glare through the dark, each clutching at the coarse wool. Then the boy whimpers, and shame forces you both to loosen your grip. The dungeon amplifies every sound of this struggle. Chains clinking, straw rustling, cloth whispering. It becomes a rhythm, musical yet mocking. You think of the monks' chants and realize this shifting, this scratching is your own midnight hymn. Modern researchers note that this constant movement was inevitable. It was both a sign of survival and of torment. Bodies too weak to stir often froze first. Stillness was a death sentence. Your ceaseless tossing means your body hasn't surrendered. Not yet. The hours crawl. You search for heat in shoulders and elbows, even in the breath fogging into your face. You tuck your feet beneath the woman's skirt, apologizing under your breath. She doesn't move away. You realize the lesson etched into this restless night. Survival here is not found in stillness. It is carved out of motion, of twitching and clutching, of chasing a warmth that never stays. You do not sleep so much as wrestle with the cold until daylight finds you. The night feels longer than usual, stretched thin. You already know what's coming. You felt it before. The fever dream. The hours when your body hovers between sleep and waking, when the dungeon blurs at its edges. The cold numbs your limbs, but your mind refuses to rest. You drift, seeing things that may or may not be real. Chroniclers wrote often about the strange visions prisoners experienced. Some described angels with wings of frost hovering above their straw beds. Others claimed to hear bells tolling in empty corridors. In London's Newgate, a man swore he saw his dead wife kneeling by his chain, only for her to vanish when he reached out. Tonight, you realize why such tales filled the margins of records. The dungeon is fertile soil for hallucination. A particularly odd anecdote from Lübeck tells of a debtor who insisted the rat spoke to him, offering bargains in exchange for crumbs. His fellow prisoners laughed, but when he died days later, they swore they still heard the squeaks forming words. You hear the scurry of rats now and wonder, uneasily, if their squeaks are shaping syllables you're too tired to recognize. Specialists are divided on how to interpret these visions. Some argue they were divine revelations. Others see them as symptoms of starvation, illness, and exhaustion. Perhaps in the dungeon, the line between miracle and madness doesn't matter. You close your eyes, and images bloom. A meadow of green grass, sunlight warming your skin. You reach for it, but the warmth burns your fingers, and suddenly you are awake, choking on the sour stink of mildew. The dungeon itself begins to feel alive. Drips echo like whispers. Shadows stretch into shapes that move when you don't. You blink hard, but the figures linger, faces etched into the stone. Modern researchers suggest sleep deprivation in such conditions mirrored torture. Without steady rest, the mind eats itself, producing visions to fill the void. Yet some argue these hallucinations kept prisoners alive, giving them stories to cling to, even if they were lies. You drift again. You stand in a grand hall, a fire blazing. But the chains are still on your ankles, rattling against the marble. Guests laugh, ignoring you, and when you shout, their faces melt into masks of rats. You jolt awake with a cry, startling the boy. The woman hums softly, a tune without words, to comfort him, or perhaps to steady her own nerves. The sound pulls you back from the panic. Somewhere down the corridor, another prisoner shrieks in his sleep. His cry echoes like a blade. You realize you aren't the only one haunted. The whole dungeon is an orchestra of nightmares. By dawn, you feel drained, hollowed out by visions. Yet you are also relieved. The hallucinations, while tormenting, prove you are still alive, still fighting. Death brings silence. Madness, at least, still makes noise. The fever dreams leave you weak, but tonight the dungeon offers a different trial. Silence. The voices that usually moan and chant have dwindled. The boy sleeps heavily. The woman breathes shallowly. Even the poet is still. The corridor beyond is hushed. For a moment, you welcome it, until the silence grows too complete. Chroniclers often remarked that silence in a jail could be more suffocating than noise. A clerk from Bruges wrote that when the prisoners no longer groaned, it was as though death itself had entered to keep watch. A keeper in London confessed he preferred the racket of moans to the eerie quiet that settled after disease swept through. Tonight, you understand, the absence of sound is its own torment. One unusual tale from a Castilian record tells of captives who deliberately sang bawdy songs just to banish the silence. They claimed that without noise, they could feel madness creeping into their skulls, like frost through a crack. You lie still, straining your ears, and wonder if you should hum or speak just to break the stillness before it swallows you. Historians are uncertain whether this silence was imposed or accidental. Did guards enforce it with beatings? Or did illness and despair simply dull the voices? Both weigh on you as you stare at the ceiling, your heartbeat thudding louder than footsteps ever did. The smell remains, thick as always, but it feels amplified without sound to distract you. Even the rats are subdued, their scratching muffled. You shift in your straw, desperate for a distraction. The chain scrapes the floor with a jarring clang. The sound startles you like a shout in a chapel. The boy stirs, murmurs, and sinks back into stillness. The echo fades, leaving you lonelier than before. Modern researchers suggest sensory deprivation was one of the dungeon's cruelest weapons. Too much noise frayed the nerves, but too little hollowed the mind. Prisoners wrote that they spoke aloud just to hear a voice, even if it was their own.
Nonsense words, fragments of memory, just to keep company with yourself. Your own voice sounds strange, fragile against the stone. The silence swallows it whole. Hours creep by like years. You count your breaths, but lose track. You count the drips of water, but the irregular rhythm drives you mad. Your mind begins to invent noises, footsteps that aren't there, whispers just beyond reach. By dawn, when the first real noises return, boots stomping, keys rattling, you almost cry with relief. You realize then that sound, however cruel, is proof of life. Noise means others still exist. Silence, by contrast, feels like being buried alive. The silence of the previous night clings to your bones. But tonight, the torment is not sound, but time itself. You lie on the straw, chain heavy, and realize you can no longer tell if the moon has risen. You cannot tell if the gray light that creeps through the arrow slit is dawn or just mist. Hours dissolve, shapeless. Chroniclers left notes on this peculiar torture.
Prisoners, deprived of sunlight, lost their sense of time completely. A clerk in Cologne remarked that men begged, not for food, but to be told what day it was. Another from Florence described debtors who swore they had been held for months when only weeks had passed. Time in a dungeon was the easiest thing to lose and the hardest to endure. A strange anecdote survives from Prague. A merchant claimed he measured days by counting the drips of water from the ceiling. He scratched thousands of tallies into the wall. When he was finally freed, he discovered he had miscounted by seasons. Convinced winter was still beginning, though spring had already arrived. You listen to the drip in your own cell and abandon the count before madness takes hold. Historians are divided on whether this was accidental or intentional. Was it just the architecture of defense? Or were the arrow slits designed to obscure time, ensuring no prisoner knew whether death approached at dawn or dusk? Both theories feel true as you lie there, blind to the hours. The boy shifts, asking weakly, "Is it morning yet?" The woman strokes his hair and answers, "Soon," though her eyes are as lost as yours. Everyone clings to their own illusion. The poet recites verses at what he claims is evening. The woman hums her tune before curling up, marking what she calls midnight. The boy counts to 100 before sleeping, and again when he wakes, calling it a day. None of these rituals are real, yet each carries the weight of survival. You try to mark hours by your own body, hunger, shivering, fatigue, but they betray you. Hunger is constant. Shivering never ends. The dungeon has stolen the clocks from your very flesh. Modern researchers call this temporal collapse. They suggest it breaks prisoners faster than chains, robbing them of a sense of progress. Without days, suffering feels endless. At one point, you swear you see a faint glow. Dawn. You sit up, heart pounding, but the light fades. It was just a torch in the corridor, or your own imagination. You slump back, furious at your own hope. Finally, after what feels like years, boots thud. A key rattles. Dawn has come. Relief floods you. Not because morning offers warmth, but because it proves time has not stopped. The world still moves, even if you cannot see it. You realize the cruel ingenious of this place. It does not only chain your body, it chains your hours. You have long since lost count of the days, but this night feels different. Not colder, not louder, just heavier. The stones themselves seem to be leaning inward. You sense that the dungeon has reached its final lesson. You know the drills by now. The restless shifting, the gnawing hunger, the whispers of poetry or prayer. Yet tonight, none of these bring distraction. The cold, the chains, the darkness, everything feels sharper, as if the walls are reminding you one last time of their power. Chroniclers often wrote that the worst part of imprisonment wasn't the torture or even the threat of death. It was the sheer exhaustion of enduring. One English debtor compared it to a winter that never yields to spring. A monk in Cologne described prisoners as souls frozen before their bodies die. You understand both lines perfectly now. What you endure isn't one night, but the endless repetition of nights, each identical, each devouring a piece of hope. An unusual story survives from a Swiss jail. One man claimed he grew fond of his straw bed after years underground, swearing it was softer than any feather mattress. When he was finally freed, he begged to keep a bundle of the filthy stalks. Whether the tale is true or not, it reveals the dungeon's final cruelty. You learn to mistake misery for comfort, chains for routine. You catch yourself tonight stroking the coarse, greasy blanket scrap as if it were velvet, and the thought unsettles you more than the hunger ever could. Academics remain divided over what broke prisoners most, the physical torments or the creeping acceptance of them. Some argue frost destroyed the body first, others that despair hollowed the mind long before. You feel both truths. Your joints ache, but worse, you have started to believe that this life is normal. That is the deepest wound. The boy stirs, murmuring for his mother. The woman adjusts her shawl. The foreigner hums faintly in his sleep. The poet scribbles lines on stone with his chain. They all cling to their rituals, but you see now that these are less about hope than about habit. The dungeon teaches you to survive by repetition, but it also teaches you to forget what life felt like before. You curl tighter, listening to the dungeon's chorus one last time. The drip of water, the shuffle of rats, the rasp of breathing. The sounds blur into a rhythm, the heartbeat of the prison itself. As dawn creeps faintly through the slit, a strange calm settles over you. Perhaps it is exhaustion, perhaps resignation. The frost no longer bites quite as fiercely. For the first time, you don't fight the dungeon. You simply exist within it. And in that surrender, you understand its final truth. Medieval prisoners did not sleep to rest. They slept to endure. They slept to drift just far enough from misery to be able to face another dawn. The floor, the straw, the blanket, the shawl, none of them were beds. They were lifelines, fragile threads keeping a body alive until fate or ransom or death cut them free. And now, as the last echoes of the dungeon fade, let yourself breathe slower. The journey is over. The heavy stone walls that pressed so close begin to soften, dissolving into history. Let the sounds of that world fade. The drip of water becomes gentler, like rain outside your own window. The rustle of straw turns into the quiet whisper of your own quilt being drawn closer. Even the chill, once so biting, becomes just the cool, fresh air of your own room, soothing your skin. You have walked through those endless nights. You have felt the stone and the straw and the chains. But you have also witnessed those small, stubborn sparks of humanity. A shawl shared, a song hummed, a verse whispered in defiance. That, too, is part of the history. In every dungeon, alongside the despair, there was endurance. But that endurance is not needed now. That world is far away, and you are here. Your bed is softer than stone. Your blanket is warmer than rags, and your night is safe. Breathe in the gratitude of that truth. Let the dungeon fade, its echoes dissolving into quiet. The only sounds you hear now are the calm rhythms of your own room, your own steady breath, your own heartbeat. Sleep is no longer an act of endurance. It is not a battle to be won. It is a gift, one you can embrace freely. So rest now. Let the weight slip away from your body. The night is yours, safe and warm and calm. Good night.